Meeting has been started. Hello everyone, just be starting in just a couple of minutes. Well, in just a minute, we're just letting everybody in, just letting people in through the lobby. Welcome, and yeah, we're going to be getting to it in just a moment. We're letting people in. So this session will be recorded. Everyone should get a alert about that as well. Okay, so we'll keep letting people in, but we'll get going with introductions, so then we can kick off this session. So my name is Tom Weaver. I'm from Beam Development and Therapy, and Beam Development and Training. Sorry. And today we're going to be going through a session on emotional intelligence for people. So welcome to this community. You are a part of our people. And we have lots of exciting announcements today. We have some great plans for 2025, and we'd love for you to all be a part of it. So whilst we're still letting a few people in, this session will be recorded, and if you have to leave at any time, then the whole session will be sent to you after we've finished, so later on today, and we will also be sending the resources and anything else that we talk about during the session. So Leanne will be taking you through the session today. I'll be in the chat, so if you have any questions, we will get to them. But we'll be putting in links, the resources, and sending you off to all the places where we can support you as well. So I'm going to hand over to Leanne now, and we can get going with the session.
Perfect. Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone. Really lovely to be with you today. I was hoping my Christmas jumper would be a little bit more visible, but it's not, but I promise I am wearing one. Today's session is all about emotional intelligence, which is a huge session. And in all honesty, it's a real struggle to deliver this session in a 45-minute lunch and learn. But what I've got planned for you for the session is really giving you an overview of what emotional intelligence is. And then specifically, as with all of these sessions, if you've come to any before, looking at how that relates to you as a people person. So very, very briefly, some of you will have seen myself or Tom train before. We deliver wellbeing and personal development training courses in more than 45 countries around the world. Loads of them are CPD accredited. We've been doing it for well over a decade. And one of the things we've noticed in our work with loads of different organizations is we build really good relationships with L&D managers, people officers, heads of HR. And those people are always so passionate about supporting their staff, about helping them get access to the right support that they need. But unfortunately, what we see over and over again is those people are also the ones who get neglected. They put everyone else's needs above their own and end up quite often feeling drained, burnt out, going through something we have talked about in previous sessions called compassion fatigue. And it's kind of a paradox. You are generally the people who promote well-being and generally not so great at doing it for ourselves because we're so concerned with everyone else. It's certainly something we see in therapy as well. And as many of you all know, we're also therapists and we bring a lot of that to our training. And so eventually, after lots and lots of conversations, Tom and I came up with the idea that we need to do something about this. We need to start supporting the people so they're resilient, they're taken care of, they know how to practice healthy self-care. And in doing that, we then create this amazing ripple effect. So you're in a stronger position to actually care for all those people around you as well, whether that's at work or at home. And that's really the ethos of people. There's lots more to tell you about it. We've got, as Tom said, huge plans for 2025. But I think it's really useful to know that everything that we're doing here has that intention that we're going to create a ripple effect. And so you can start to take away anything you cover here, anything you access from us, and bring that into the workplace to support your team. So very briefly, what we're going to cover in this session, we're going to get a better understanding of what emotional intelligence is. So understanding the history of it, what we mean when we talk about it, and why it applies to us. I'll also talk about why EQ matters, particularly in the workplace. Why do we need to be aware of that? We will then focus largely on Goleman's model of emotional intelligence. I'll explain who Goleman is if you haven't heard of him before, and I'll explain why I believe it's really important we start with that model as at least a foundation to understanding it. And then really importantly, I'll be kind of widening the net after I've explained emotional intelligence to you. I'll be helping you understand how EQ, emotional intelligence, can ripple out when you're a people person, and why you understanding it will help you be a better leader, a better manager, better at wellbeing support, and how you can use that in your role as a people person. So plenty to cover. As I say, this is a huge topic and very difficult to cover in 45 minutes. So let's start with understanding emotional intelligence. So it used to be believed that the self was made up of two core components. So that was our personality. So our personality was generally believed to be what was created from our environment, what we inherited from our parents and our grandparents, and kind of the essence and the core of who we are. Then it was believed that the other factor that made us a whole person was also our intelligence. And our intelligence gained more and more value. And I don't know if you've ever kind of looked at your IQ score, but some people really focus on the importance of an IQ score. People often talk about Einstein's IQ and things like that. And in terms of leadership and being a people person, it was generally believed that in order to be a good leader, you needed to have a good personality and a high IQ. Now, I don't know about you, but I can certainly think of people in leadership that possibly don't have either. I mean, we can think of some political figures probably that don't have the most dazzling personality or even the highest IQ. And so this belief that the self was made up of these two core components started to be questioned a little bit. And then in the mid-1990s, 1995, someone called Daniel Goleman started to look at this third factor that made up the self. And he coined the term emotional intelligence, which is also known as your EQ, your emotional quotient. And he started to recognize that what often made a good leader, whether that was in business, in military, in sport, wasn't necessarily the personality, wasn't necessarily the IQ, but often came down to the ability for someone to understand themselves and understand other human beings. And Goleman came up with the concept that emotional intelligence was a set of skills that some people were better at than others, that help them interact with other human beings in a healthier way. In very simple terms, your emotional intelligence is how you understand yourself and how you understand other human beings. Now, the best thing to take away from this part of the session is that our emotional intelligence isn't fixed. It is absolutely something we can work on, we can develop, we can build on. And for another time, I'm sure, that really depends upon our mindset, whether we believe we have the ability to change. So if we have a growth mindset, or whether we believe that I am who I am and I'm not going to change, if we have a fixed mindset. If we step into the fact that we have a growth mindset, we believe we have the capacity to change, then absolutely your emotional intelligence can be improved and developed over time. So, why is emotional intelligence important, particularly in the workplace? Well, the workplace is quite unique, and boy, in the last few years, it's really changed as well. So, if you think about it, when we first take on a job, the real focus on us getting that job is maybe our qualifications, our skills, our experience, our ability to demonstrate our competency within those roles. And we may be excellent at all of those. We may have scored really highly. What it very rarely takes into account is the fact that within our work environment, we will encounter lots of different personality types. And we may find ourselves not always liking all of those people, not always getting on with all of those people. If we're honest, some of those people that we work with may not necessarily be the kind of person we would choose to be around if we felt we had the choice. And so many of us can find that even if we feel skilled and capable and qualified with a job, the people around us will massively impact our ability to do that job well. And many of us, and particularly the people in this virtual room, have a real need to interact with a whole variety of people, which can have a really big impact on our enjoyment in the role and our performance in the role. And it can sometimes bring about lots of issues. So if you think about it, in an office environment, we're kind of thrown together with people of quite varying ages. Therefore, we perhaps come from totally different generations, people who have different beliefs, different values, different cultural backgrounds, different socioeconomic backgrounds, different educational backgrounds. And so that can lead us to feel that sometimes we're surrounded by people we don't quite get, we can't quite click with, or maybe that we feel that they're not our people. Now, this is where emotional intelligence comes in, because the basic premise of emotional intelligence is about being aware of the fact that I don't need to get on with everyone, I don't need to like everyone, I definitely don't need to agree with everyone. But in order for me to get by in my work, I need to build a capacity to work well with others. And that involves me taking responsibility for my own emotions. And it also involves me being aware of other people's emotions. So there's always these two key competencies when we're looking at emotional intelligence. It's awareness of the self and awareness of others. And so the people who are great at doing that tend to get by better, tend to be seen as better leaders, tend to be seen as someone that others are more happy to follow and take instruction from. And so it's really important for us as people to be able to navigate that and get better at it. And so I mentioned that in the mid-1990s, Daniel Goleman was the first person to really start talking about emotional intelligence. Goleman is still prolific now. You can absolutely follow him on LinkedIn. He's still writing, he's still really building and developing the emotional intelligence model. But when he first came up with the model in 1995, he wrote quite an extensive book. It's a big book. And he talked about emotional intelligence having 5 key components. He found that the people who were great at leadership, the people who had resilience and staying power, tended to be distinguished by a high degree of emotional intelligence determined by these 5 key components. And so the first component, and actually the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, is self-awareness. Our ability to recognize what we're feeling, our ability to understand our habitual responses, our ability to evaluate ourselves and recognize how our emotions can drive our performance, our behavior. When you're self-aware, you can see yourself from an external perspective. When you're self-aware, you know your strengths, but you also know your limitations. So self-awareness is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence, because if I'm not aware of myself, it makes all the other components really difficult. The next is seen as self-regulation or managing emotions. So this is taking self-awareness that one step further, because I can be self-aware that I get really angry quickly, or I'm really impatient, or I get really emotional at a certain topic. But if I don't know how to regulate that, how to manage those emotions, the awareness is almost torture. It's knowing how to deal with it that becomes really important. So self-regulation is having the ability to stay focused and think clearly, even if you're experiencing intense emotions. Being able to manage your own emotional state, to know when it's appropriate to let out certain emotions and when we need to keep them contained. And it can stop us from having knee-jerk reactions, or making hasty emotional decisions, or making those what I would call inner chimp moments where we lash out and then we regret it. So self-regulation is a core component of understanding ourselves. The next one is social skills. So social skills is our ability to manage, influence, inspire, lead other people. Being able to handle not only our own emotions, but the emotions of others in all of our relationships. So we can use that to build a successful interaction and a foundation for a healthy relationship. Social skills are the key to successful teamwork, to a cohesive team. So it's not necessarily us all agreeing, but it's having the ability to interact with each other in a healthy way. Empathy. If you came to our Lunch and Learn last month, I talked about empathetic leadership. And we talked about the importance of empathy in a lot of detail. By the way, you can access all of the past sessions. We can point you to those and you can get access to any of those. But in a nutshell, when I talked about empathy last month, I talked about how empathy is our ability to be able to recognize that someone is experiencing an emotion, but I don't necessarily have to feel it. And I talked last month about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I always use this example to describe it, where if you're walking down the road and there's a great big hole in the road and you look in it and someone's fallen in it, sympathy is saying, oh no, you've fallen in a hole. Let me climb in and keep you company. So it's very nice and very kind, but actually you end up putting yourself in a negative situation to keep that other person company in their unhappiness. Empathy is walking down the road, seeing the person fall in the hole and saying, oh no, you're stuck in a hole. How do I get you out? I don't need to get in the hole with you. I can stay up here, and I'm actually more used being up here rather than climbing in the hole with you. So empathy is our ability to sense, to understand, to respond to what someone else is feeling without it negatively impacting ourselves. So we need a little bit of self-awareness when we're experiencing empathy, to recognize if we're taking on too much, if we're absorbing too much. When I delivered the session last month, people were messaging me afterwards and talking about how they thought they were empathetic, but they realized that they were constantly helping other people and absorbing their problems. So we need a bit more self-awareness to recognize that I can care without it damaging and hurting me. So if you're not aware of your own emotions, it's hard to empathize with other people. And then the last one is motivation. Motivating ourselves is the ability to use our emotions to guide us towards our goals. Now, this ability will enable you to persevere, to be resilient. We know that motivation is a key factor in us being able to deal with challenges. Knowing why I'm doing something is much more likely to enable me to persevere and keep doing it. So all 5 of these components are key aspects in terms of emotional intelligence. And first and foremost, when we're reflecting on this, we need to first think about how this impacts us. Now, at the end of this session, I've created Goleman's survey for emotional intelligence. So you can do that survey or questionnaire at the end of this, and you can see where you score. It's about 50 questions, so it's way too long to do during this session, but feel free to complete it afterwards. And what usually happens when people complete the EQ questionnaire is they already really know where they lack a little bit. So as I'm explaining all of these, you probably already have some idea of, I'm not great at managing my emotions. I know what they are. I know that they're there, but sometimes they just blurt out on other people. Or I'm not great at empathy. I find it really hard to show that side of caring and understanding. So it'd be useful for you after this session to complete the EQ survey and just see where you sit. But how does this affect you as a people person? How do you start to use these skills, particularly when managing and caring for others? So I want to break down each of the 5 and then really give you a practical application for how you can build on this part of your emotional intelligence to improve it as a people person. So self-awareness as a people person is crucial because you are usually the first point of contact when someone else is struggling. But it's really crucial in that moment to recognize where you're at before you start to help someone else. So it helps you start to notice things that we've talked about in previous sessions. So things like compassion fatigue, where you've just cared too much for too long and all of a sudden you're starting to feel a sense of numbness. Or it helps you recognize a sense of overwhelm. So you start to recognize, do you know what? I don't really have the capacity right now. I need to go and fill up my cup a little bit so I can come back and deal with this in a better way. So let's imagine you've had back-to-back meetings, emotional conversations. If we're not self-aware, we might not recognize how draining that's been on us and how desperately we need to just pause and recharge. If we're self-aware, we recognize that in ourselves. We don't feel guilty for it. We don't feel that we're not strong enough. We recognize it. An important part of being a successful human being is I need to recharge myself. So some practical applications for you to improve your self-awareness is to get a system where you frequently check in with yourself. And this is a really funny one because most of the time we don't check in with ourselves unless we're feeling something quite uncomfortable. So if you are feeling unwell today, you will probably have checked in with yourself a few times to see how you're feeling. But if you're feeling quite average, middle of the road today, you probably haven't checked in with yourself at all. So there's lots of ways you can do this. There are apps that do it. There's a fantastic app. If any of you have ever done Duolingo, the language app, there's a kind of mental health app that makes a game out of achieving goals and looking after your mental health called Finch. I'll get Tom to put a little link to it in the chat box. And it's a great way of checking in with yourself because every time you open that app, it asks you how you're feeling. If you're not into apps, you could perhaps diary or journal how you're feeling, or literally start to create a routine where every time I sit at my desk, before I do anything, I'm going to ask myself, how am I feeling in this moment? Just these tiny little micro check-ins help you start to become more self-aware. Thank you, Tom. It's a lovely app and I really recommend it. It's predominantly totally free as well, very much like Duolingo. Self-regulation. Now, whenever I teach emotional intelligence, and I've been teaching it for about 12 years in all sorts of different companies, all sorts of levels, and self-regulation is generally the one that people score the lowest on. So if when you do your EQ test, you notice you struggle on self-regulation, do not feel bad because this is the one people tend to struggle with the most. And I do believe that a big part of that is right now, most of us are bombarded with too much information that can become emotionally overwhelming, whether that's our workload, whether that's our family responsibilities, whether that's media, things that we see in the news, social media. It tends to cause us to feel quite overwhelmed. And so it makes it difficult for us to manage our emotions. But as a people person, you know that you're a role model for emotional stability, right? Your response sets the tone for other people. You're the person they go to in a crisis. You're the person that the management team says, okay, give them that difficult news. And how you handle it is how other people will observe it and start to respond. So self-regulation is essential for you to be able to stay calm in those stressful situations, to stay composed when something's quite emotionally charged. If you're dealing with a grievance, a disciplinary, some conflict in the workplace, you're the person that needs to stay composed and in control. Equally, self-regulation is really important as a people person because you don't want to get sucked into other people's challenges. So imagine a colleague comes to you and vents their frustration at you. In a human context, you may well feel a bit defensive or you may well feel a little bit upset. But actually, self-regulation allows you to stay grounded, to pause, to stay calm, and to respond thoughtfully. So how do we do that? Well, there's a lovely little simple technique called the pause, think, act technique, known as the PTA tool. And the pause, think, act technique is exactly what it says on the tin. It's really conditioning our brain to respond rather than react. Reacting very often gets us into trouble. Responding allows us to be more considered and more aware of consequences, and therefore enables us to present a better version of ourselves. And it is reminding ourselves, I'm just going to pause, I'm going to think about it for a bit, and then I'm going to act. We can trigger that pause using lots of different techniques. We've talked in the past sessions about things like breathing exercises, grounding exercises, being able to kind of leave the room and compose yourself and come back. All of those enable you to calm yourself in the moment. Someone who scores high on self-regulation, if you've ever read Professor Steve Peters' book, The Chimp Paradox, those who score high on self-regulation have very good control of their inner chimp. Those who score badly have a chimp who runs around playing havoc most of the time. The next one is social skills. Now, as a people person, this is par for the course, right? You're constantly interacting with others. You need to build trust with people. You need to resolve conflict. You need to foster collaboration. You need to foster resolutions. All of that would make me believe that most of you possess a high level of social skills already, given the work that you do. But we can always build on our EQ, so we can build on our ability to have strong social skills. And the more we do that, the more it will enable us to communicate clearly, to navigate complex interpersonal dynamics, to be able to not personalize things, not get over emotional, and also to be able to perhaps see the hidden text, the subtext when someone's talking to us. So great ways of building our ability to be better at social skills. You could do things like use open-ended questions. I'm sure most of you have done that in your training in some way, using those questions that are much more why, how, what, rather than closed questions to encourage dialogue and deepen those connections. But I think it's worth being mindful of how important non-verbal communication is. So our tone and our body language. Now, you've probably seen the statistics that around 8% of what we say, 7 to 8% of what we say, so the actual words, is communicated. The rest is predominantly body language and tone. And so if I said to you, where it's 12:30, if I said to you, afternoon, that sounds very different to afternoon. The word is the same. So the word is almost irrelevant. It's how I say the word that you start to interpret the subtext of that conversation. And it's incredible how one word can be said so differently. You can do this with your colleagues, get them to say hello in as many different emotional ways as they can. And you start to see how good you are at reading the subtext. And people who are great at nonverbal communication are really good at social skills because it enables you to look around a room and recognize the person who's frustrated, recognize the person who's feeling anxious or scared, recognize the person who's perhaps dominating a conversation and you need to steer it a little bit. So the better you are at observing non-verbal communication, the better you will be at creating cohesion within your team and also in your families as well. Empathy. So as we've already touched upon, really empathy is at the heart of what you do. But as we've talked about in previous sessions, overdoing empathy can be to your detriment. So what we're always looking for is healthy empathy. Empathy that allows you to support other people, to be caring and compassionate without absorbing their emotions and draining yourself. So we can sit with a team member and listen to their struggles and absolutely empathize that that's a horrible place to be. We can validate their feelings, we can validate their experience. But the important part of empathy is maintaining your own personal boundary, making sure you don't fully absorb it. When I discussed it in last month's session, I even talked about physical boundaries in empathy. So making sure that you're not sat right next to the person, that you have a little bit of literally physical distance. So you're able to get perspective and be able to help that person a bit more. Lots and lots of ways to start to really improve our ability to be empathetic. We can practice active listening. The challenge we have is that most of us unfortunately listen with the intent of replying. So as soon as someone starts talking, we're already constructing our response. So we're very rarely fully present when someone's talking. Active listening is challenging yourself to mirror back what that person's saying, to prove to yourself that you're fully engaged and that you're really present with that. Not rushing to solve a problem, not rushing to share your own personal experience or make it about you. And then another tool, which again I shared at last month's session, is the importance of taking empathy breaks. Empathy break is when you recognize that you've had something quite intense, quite challenging, demanding, and you challenge yourself to step away before you do anything else. And it's known as the 5-5-5 break. So you step away for 5 minutes. So you tell yourself, I'm not going to respond to this or do anything about this for 5 minutes. Ideally, you want to leave that environment altogether if you can. Then after the 5 minutes has passed, you then tell yourself, I'm going to take 5 slow, deep breaths all through the nose. So nice and calm and controlled. And then you give yourself another 5 minutes in which you can reframe your response. So again, this is really like the pause, think, act technique in a different format. It's challenging yourself to always be responsive, not reactive. It's a great way of building up empathy without hurting yourself. And then the final component is motivation. This is a tricky one for some of us. I would say this is second lowest when I deliver these sessions, because particularly as a people person, supporting and motivating others can be really emotionally draining. But motivation is crucial to keep ourselves, keep others motivated to the end goal, to the purpose. Now, one of the ways that we stay motivated is really knowing why we're doing something, staying connected to that why, because that'll energize and motivate you even on really difficult days. Being able to know your why means that even when we find something really difficult, we feel the grit and determination to keep going. So let's imagine you're having a really challenging time at work right now. If why you do your job is because it pays the bills, which is totally okay and understandable, but if that's your only why for doing that job, when you're going through a difficult time, it will be really challenging. If, however, your why is it pays the bills, but I feel like I'm making a difference, and I might not agree with management, but I really love my team, and it gives me a sense of purpose, and I get some personal development with it. The more why you have for doing that job, the easier you will find it to go through those tough patches. And this applies to every change or difficult periods in our life in any area. When we have a strong why, we are much more capable of persevering. So know your why. Perhaps reflect every now and then. Some of us take a job at 20 and we're still doing it 20 years later. Your why of having that job at 20 is going to be vastly different to your why of having that job at 40. So reflect on it. Make sure you add to your why. This is also a really great thing to do in our personal relationships as well. Why am I in that marriage? Why am I friends with that person? The more whys we have, the more meaningful it will be. Another great way of keeping that motivation, which I'm sure most of you know, is setting small wins throughout. So small, achievable goals to keep you motivated and ideally prevent you from losing interest or even worse, burning out. So hopefully this has given you a good idea of how you can start to bring EQ in specifically as a people person. I mentioned that at the end of this, Tom will be sharing the emotional intelligence test. Now, a couple of things to say about this. First of all, because this is a very brief session, I am only talking about Goleman's model of emotional intelligence, and I'm only talking about his original foundation model. Goleman has evolved that model, but there are also, I've lost count, but a lot of other emotional intelligence models out there. Some of them have more than 20 components. The important part for this is if we understand Goleman's model of emotional intelligence, then we can build on it. So the EQ test that is shared in the chat box is specifically for Goleman's 5-component model of emotional intelligence. If you just Google EQ test, then what, from my experience, comes up is actually a lot of data capture, a lot of just inaccurate, unhelpful information that will not support you. So please, if you're going to do this and you're going to Google a different model, please do look at Goleman's model of emotional intelligence first and foremost. All of the instructions for doing it are on the form that is there. And if you want to share it with your team, by all means, share it. It's not our personal thing. It is Goleman's model. We've just put it into a Beam format. So as Tom's sharing some information there, I'll just summarize. And what I want to summarize is really looking at how you can increase all 5 components as a people person. So for self-awareness, work out how you can build some regular check-ins, trying to help you balance your emotions a little bit more. For self-regulation, think about how you can respond rather than react. So the pause, think, act model. Empathy, make sure that you have healthy boundaries and make sure that you step away when you're dealing with something really emotionally challenging. Social skills, challenge yourself to be better at reading those nonverbal cues. One of my favorite ways to do this is sit in a cafe somewhere, Don't look at your phone, just sit and observe people. And you will start to see all sorts of conversations going on that aren't saying a word. And motivation, stay connected to your why. That'll really help your resilience and give you focus on what you're trying to achieve. So what's next? So the video and the resources will be emailed out to you. We always tell people that you can register for any of these workshops. And if you can't attend in person, or if you know you've got to zip off at a certain time, as long as you've registered, we will send you all of those resources. But you can also get those resources from our website directly. So if you go to beamtraining.co.uk/people home, you will be able to log in and access past webinars and resources. If you want to talk to us about what we can do for you personally, or coming into your organization and supporting your staff, we are more than happy to have a chat with you. We have a LinkedIn group called the People Network. We are super selective with this LinkedIn group. We have turned a lot of people down who don't qualify as a people person. But in this group, we have big plans for creating a community where we can share some of those more well-being challenges, where we can share some best practice, where we can get to know other people professionals. Please feel free to join. The fact that you've come here will make sure that you are allowed in. And our next Free People workshop is on the 15th of January. And that will be perfectly timed for the new year because it's positive habits for people. Bit of an alliteration there. So please sign up for that as well. If you need any more help or support, we offer employee support programs, wellbeing workshops, training programs, and you can connect with Tom or myself on LinkedIn or email. I will hand over to Tom, who just wants to let you know about our People Network starting next year. And I will wish you all a very Merry Christmas and a very happy, healthy, peaceful 2025. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Leanne. And just before you all leave to grab some lunch, there are a few important announcements. Leanne mentioned the LinkedIn group. If you head to the LinkedIn group, there is also our whole 2025 schedule for our events. So that is lunch and learns that are planned out every month for the whole next year. And they're all free. So you can sign up to every single one, make sure they're in your schedule, and register, and the links to register are in that post as well. We also are starting the People network discussions. Now these sessions are limited to 20 people only, and we're keeping it small so we can have a more of a discussion, and keeping that smaller group is really vital to increasing that engagement. If you can't get on, there will also be a wait list. So if someone drops out, then we will let everybody know. And again, we have scheduled these out for the whole of 2025. So head to the LinkedIn group and you'll be able to do that as well. Or head to our website, find the people section, and all of the events will be there as well. Leanne mentioned the next session, which is the 15th of January, Positive Habits, People, but the first network group is the 22nd of January. So there are loads of other links in the chat as well. These will all be sent to you via email after this session. So don't worry if you haven't managed to get all of it down. Thank you very much for coming along to this session. We wish you a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing all of you, people, in the new year.
Thank you, everyone. Happy Christmas. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, lovely.
I love that. Thank you all. Merry Christmas.
Wonderful. Thank you for coming along.
Oh, you're so welcome, Helen. Pleasure to have you here.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that concludes this session. You have our contact details if you